Hi, I'm Bob Dover, and welcome to my presentation on stream restoration in Suburbia. I'll be presenting some case study information from uh, projects in Columbia, Maryland, and I am a resident of Columbia. And by education and profession, I'm a geologist with specialization in stormwater hydrology, stormwater permitting, and environmental planning. The purpose of the presentation overall is to describe how and why these projects called stream restorations are done, what are the benefits of those projects, and what are the adverse impacts of those projects, the special challenges and impacts that occur when these projects are done in suburban neighborhoods, uh, some observations on how these projects are regulated and how the public is engaged. The presentation is going to be presented in 4 modules. Module 1 here is just going to be an introduction discussing the practice of stream restoration, how it is technically done, and what are some of the technical challenges. And then in Module 2, we'll look at some of the results from the Longfellow Stream Restoration Project here in Columbia. And then in Modules 3 and 4, we'll look at a project that was proposed here in Columbia, the Elkhorn Branch Project. And I'll split that up into 2 modules. Module 3 will look at issues in the stream itself, and Module 4 will look at issues in the lake. And then at the end, I present the possibility maybe I'll tack on additional modules later. Maybe other people will want to join in and put on their own modules. We'll leave that open-ended. The practice of stream restoration is based on the knowledge that hydrology, morphology, and water quality of many streams in suburban areas has been impacted by residential and commercial development on either side of the stream. So when these areas are developed, they have to obviously chop down the mature trees that are there, the mature forest, to make room for roads and buildings and parking lots. They also compact the soil, and then they replace permeable surfaces with impermeable. So in original condition, when these areas were forests, precipitation would fall, the rainfall would hit the soil, it would infiltrate, it would go down to the groundwater table. From the groundwater, tree roots would absorb the water, and that water would be transpired by the leaves of the trees, and it would be removed from the watershed entirely. And so, in this way, mature trees really do an important hydrologic function in reducing runoff. The problem is when you cut down those trees, now that water stays in the water table, stays in the watershed, and now it becomes runoff. When it rains, the available storage space fills up much quicker and becomes runoff. And so these effects on the streams, this elevated runoff, usually includes an increase in the runoff volume and the runoff velocity. And the higher velocity increases the rate of erosion within the streams. So now you've got decreased water quality, you've got a lot of sediment in the water, and that reduces ecological function in the stream. It now is causing sediment deposition in downstream areas. And then it modifies the morphology of the stream and the floodplain. So it causes the stream to do what's called channelization, where it erodes down instead of side to side. And so when it rains, the water doesn't spill out over the edges of the stream and into the floodplain. Instead, it stays in the channel and causing the channel to erode even deeper. And now the water that was supposed to have gone out to the floodplain and it would have created wetlands doesn't get there. So this is called disconnection of the channel from the floodplain. And then obviously this channelization threatens if there's infrastructure in the area, as we see here in the photo in Elkhorn Branch. There's an asphalt biking and hiking trail right next to the stream, and they've had to fence it off because the stream was threatening it. And in fact, they have since gone back to this area and actually moved the trail. Stream restoration then is a common tool practice used to attempt to return the stream channel and the floodplain, water quality, runoff volumes, and the ecological function to their original conditions. And this is accomplished by first they come in and they cut down all the mature trees within the floodplain. And also, even outside of the floodplain, they'll cut down large numbers of trees to provide access for the heavy equipment they need to do the project. Then they'll, in the floodplain, they'll grade and fill the area to make the elevation of the channelized stream match the floodplain, and this is called reconnection. Often they will relocate the stream channel horizontally within the floodplain, and then once they've sort of put the stream where they want the stream to be, then they'll try to keep it there. So they will construct a variety of engineered hydrology control structures, cross veins, riffles, step pools to try to slow the water down and reduce erosion. They will armor the stream banks, as you can see here in the photo, again, to try to stop erosion. And then once all this is done, they will go back out to the floodplain and they will replant small trees and live stakes to eventually try to achieve reforestation of the area where they've cut down all the trees. Why is this done? If you're a landowner and you have infrastructure on your land, you may want to stop the stream from encroaching on that infrastructure or on adjacent properties. Or if you've got lakes and ponds, you may want to reduce erosion so you don't have to dredge those lakes and ponds. On a regional scale, watershed managers and regulatory agencies are trying to improve water quality and ecological function in downstream areas. And in Columbia, we are in the Patuxent River watershed, which means that leads to the Chesapeake Bay, and agencies are actively trying to restore water quality and ecological function to the Chesapeake Bay. And so even though Columbia is about 70 miles as the stream flows from the Chesapeake Bay, it is one of the areas that's been targeted for these stream restoration projects. How do watershed managers and regulators use tools to improve water quality and ecological function? Under the Clean Water Act, individual land developers, but also counties and other agencies, are required to obtain permits to manage their stormwater runoff. So that's fine. And individual property owners may have what's called a site-specific NPDES, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit to manage stormwater runoff from their facility. Counties may have what's called an MS4 permit, and these permits will specify actions that these facilities or municipalities need to take to construct facilities or operate their watersheds according to what are called best management practices, BMPs. So you're going to hear that a lot through this presentation. And the purpose of these BMPs is to reduce delivery of pollutants to downstream areas. So our causes of the degradation of the water quality and the increase in erosion is usually loss of the trees, cutting down the mature trees, and the loss of permeable areas on the adjacent areas to the stream. However, once you've developed a suburb, you can't go back and really restore those. You can't restore the permeable soil because it's now under buildings and parking lots. And you can't necessarily replant all those trees again because the land area is now occupied by something else in a densely developed community. So instead of trying to reverse the things that cause the problem, these BMPs are intended to be used in lieu of restoration of permeable soil to try to reduce the downstream transport of pollutants. And stream restoration is one of these approved tools, or BMPs. So for these permitted parties to demonstrate that they've achieved the amount of pollutant reduction that they're supposed to achieve under the permit. The agencies have established a system where they equate the size of a BMP, so the acreage of a pond or the length of a stream, and they convert it to credits. And they've come up with a system in which those credits are deemed to be equivalent to a number of pounds of pollutant reduction. And so if you're an MS4 permit holder, you have to develop and perform a combination of these projects to generate enough credits to show that you've reduced your pollutants by a certain amount. And similarly, for an individual facility or commercial building, such as is shown here, you would have to construct on a smaller scale BMPs. So it's, you can see happens here is rain falls on the roof of the building or on the parking lot. It gets funneled to a single outfall, and so it all gets concentrated. And when it's concentrated, it flows faster. So the purpose of these BMPs is to try to disperse the water so it's not concentrated, or to try to reduce its velocity. So here in the photo is just a little swale. The water would flow in there. It would actually be detained for a little bit. Some of it would probably infiltrate through the bottom of the swale, and ultimately it would be released to the stream more slowly. Now, completely separately from the stormwater permit, there's also a system of what's called compensatory wetland mitigation that's going on. And so if you are a developer building apartment buildings and you have to disturb a certain amount of wetlands in order to build those apartment buildings, you're required to compensate for that by going out somewhere in the community and creating an equivalent amount of wetlands somewhere else. And this can be very difficult if you're already in a developed area. Land parcels are hard to come by. If you're only disturbing a quarter acre or a half acre of wetlands, it's very hard to find a quarter acre that, not only can you purchase it, but it's physically amenable to be converted to wetlands. And so what they do instead is they band together and form mitigation banks. So instead of each individual developer trying to develop their own tiny wetland, a private company will develop a larger scale mitigation bank, maybe 10 acres, maybe 20 acres. And then that will create wetland credits that can then be bought and sold like a commodity. And so if you are a developer, you need a quarter of acre of wetlands. Instead of developing it yourself, you go to the bank and the 10-acre bank, and you buy a quarter acre of their bank. And when something is created into a revenue generating commodity like that, now all of a sudden you've created an additional incentive to create more of it, even if it's not needed, even if it's not the best thing for the ecology and the hydrology at the location. There's an enormous incentive to develop and approve these projects, and it's just a financial incentive. Similar to the MS4 permits, the acreage of wetlands is converted to credits, which are then bought and sold. And stream restorations are one of several ways through which these mitigation credits can be created. The technical theory behind stream restoration is that if you manipulate the stream channel in the floodplain and you reconnect them, you will be able to force stormwater out of the channel and out across the floodplain. And once it is dispersed, the velocity of it will be much slower, and therefore it will have reduced capacity for erosion. And that is correct. And it would also spread water over the floodplain, which would create new wetlands Now, the technical challenges with this is if you fail to reduce the runoff volume entering your project area from upstream or upgrading areas, the erosion is just going to begin all over again. It was the erosion that caused the channelization in the first place, the increased runoff that caused it. And so if you don't reduce the root cause of the erosion, then it's just going to happen again. And we see this over and over and over. And this is documented in dozens of studies since 2008. Most notably, Margaret Palmer of the University of Maryland studied more than 600 of these projects in 2014 and found that even when the main goal was just to stabilize the stream, less than half of the projects achieved that. And that's because they didn't control the runoff coming from upstream. This concept is not a secret. The Columbia Association Watershed Management Plan in 2009 recognized this, and it said, don't do large-scale stream restoration projects unless you first control the upstream runoff. Now, CA has since ignored that recommendation on its two big projects, Longfellow and Elkhorn Branch. And they didn't explain why, they didn't address it, they simply went ahead and did big projects without controlling runoff. But we'll in future modules here, we'll see how that worked out. This was also one of the findings of the 2023 report by the Chesapeake Bay Program, which is the program that approves and authorizes really these stream restoration projects. And after pointing out that these projects have been done for 20 years and water quality and ecological function in the Chesapeake Bay hasn't improved, and they're trying to figure out why, one of the statements they made was, maybe these projects don't work. The implementation that has occurred may not be producing the pollutant reductions. Now, they said that and ignored it, and their ultimate conclusion was really that we just have to do more of these projects and bigger projects. But to me, that's not a logical conclusion. It is just as logical to say that the projects simply don't work. So another technical challenge is that these projects, again, involve removing acres and acres of mature trees within the floodplains. And so you've already got a problem with elevated runoff. And now by removing the mature trees, you're actually making your runoff problem worse, because those trees remove water from the groundwater and transpire it out to the atmosphere and out of the watershed for good. But if you cut those trees down, then they're not taking water out of the groundwater table. The water table rises, and now you've got increased runoff when you have these storms. And the mature trees in the floodplain, when you remove them, you're also removing their root structures, which stabilize soil. You're removing the woody debris they drop, branches and fallen trees. And when those fall, they actually slow down stormwater. They cause pooling, they create wetlands, they create habitat. There's all kinds of good things that happen from mature trees in the floodplains. And when you remove them, you stop all those functions from occurring. And then and reforesting these areas, going in and replacing these mature trees with a few 1-inch diameter trees, even if you do it on a one-to-one basis, you aren't replacing the ecological or the hydrologic impacts or even the residential impacts of these 60, 70, 80-year-old mature trees. So the impacts are going to continue for decades. And the impacts for the residential include these narrow areas of trees are fantastic buffers for noise, for light, for the residents. Residents pay premium prices to be able to live next door to a forested area just because of the visual appeal. And when you cut down these trees, now all of a sudden you've got residents exposed to noise from a commercial area or a highway on the other side, or noise from their neighbors, uh, uh, or light from their neighbors. If you've got a floodlight on your back deck, now instead of backing up to forest, you're backing up to the decks of those neighbors. And so those impacts on residents are real and are almost entirely ignored in the documentation and analysis of these projects. There's also, an issue with how these projects have been regulated and permitted, and that is because the original documents that authorized these projects, like the federal wetland mitigation rule, were developed in 2008. And at that time, there were very few of these projects that had been completed. There was very little project experience. So the benefits that these projects were expected to have were sort of optimistic expectations, and but they weren't backed up by actual data. But an entire industry grew up using these authorizations to justify their stream restoration projects. And then what happened after 2008 is that they started getting project results, and academics started studying those results, and the results weren't good. They showed that those optimistic expectations were usually not achieved. But in my reviewing a few of these permit applications in the 2020s, what first caught my eye is that they're still based on these optimistic expectations from the 2005-2008 literature. And they completely ignore the fact that there's been 15, 20 years of study since 2008. And they don't present the studies and say, well, we disagree with them, or they're irrelevant, or whatever. They simply ignore the fact that those exist. And so in communities, when these projects are proposed, the residents don't necessarily know any better, and they review it and they say, oh, well, it's going to have all these kinds of great benefits. And it's just a misinformation campaign directed at potential customers and residents. And it's not an honest way of discussing the pros and cons of these projects. Why is the issue of these projects in suburbia particularly an issue? Well, first of all, and these projects are done in urban areas and they're done in agricultural areas, but in suburban areas, there's houses right next door. In urban areas, these streams have been engineered into storm sewers, and they aren't even on the surface anymore. And in agricultural areas, there aren't buildings right up against the streams. But in suburbia, there are. And so when you remove these mature trees, you raise the groundwater levels. Now you're threatening flooding of the basements of nearby homes or their backyards. And second, these are relatively natural streams. So I understand these are considered impacted or degraded by elevated runoff. That's true. But that doesn't mean that they're dead. There's wildlife that lives there. There are trails that go through there for recreation. There's no prohibition on human contact with the water. They're not so far degraded as that. Visually, they look like normal natural streams, and if you're a resident buying a house, that's really maybe all you care about. And but now when they do these projects, they don't look natural anymore. Now they look like engineered stormwater conveyances, because that's what they look like. And so now you've got decreased quality of life, you got depressed home value for the people who already live there. The children no longer have a relatively natural stream or forest to observe, learn, and play, and that's sad. And again, removal of the trees eliminates these noise and visual barriers or buffers. So that's the end of Module 1. Upcoming in Module 2, we're going to go look at the actual survey and monitoring results from the Longfellow project in Colombia 5 years after construction was completed to see if these expected benefits occurred there or are likely to occur there. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you in Module 2.